Ready.
Got it. Okay, Dr. Ibrahim, okay. Shall we start? All right.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar today. We are very lucky today. We have an interesting topic and a very knowledgeable speaker with us, Dr. Ibrahim from UIA, sharing his knowledge on the topic of human errors. So before we start, let me give a quick overview about the program today. So basically, this is a webinar organized under the Engineering SIG, Engineering Special Interest Group, under the HFEM, Human Factors, Ergonomics and Society, Malaysia. So I am Dr. Radin Zaid Radin Umar. I am currently the chair for the SIG, for the Special Interest Group. If you are not familiar with the SIG, the Engineering SIG, let me give you a brief introduction about the SIG. Basically, we are a group of people within the HFEM, within the Human Factor Ergonomics Society of Malaysia, that share the same interest in terms of theoretical knowledge and practical applications of engineering principles in the area of ergonomic and human factors. So basically we have, let me share the slides just a little bit so that it's easier for me to point out the form, the points. Okay. Okay, so basically here is a very quick overview of the SIG. We intend to provide general platform for any activities in the area of HFE, Human Factors Engineering, and the applications in ergonomics. So our membership is open. We are open to anyone who are interested to join us, industrial practitioners, academics, regulatory bodies, agencies, students, etc., that share the same interest and would like to be actively involved in our activities. So the SIG coverage of interest include, but not limited to, the front-end engineering design, development of specification standards, human performance, reliability, errors, engineering interventions and controls, and other related activities. So if this area is something that you are aligned to, that you are interested to, so you are very much welcome to join in with our SIG activities. Okay, so in terms of our activities, all of our activities would align with these 4 objectives. Okay, so these are basically our main purpose for this SIG. So first one is awareness, promote awareness related to engineering principles and applications in human factors engineering and ergonomics initiatives. Okay, that one is the first one, which is what we are doing today, the webinar. Part of it is promoting the awareness. The next one is to arrange network events and forge links with relevant stakeholders. So this can be anybody that are in the area that are relevant in these areas. The third one is more related to research activities that can contribute towards better specifications, standards, and guidelines. And lastly, if applicable, the aim of the SIG is to provide technical assistance, support, and expertise to professionals and practitioners in the area of human factors engineering and ergonomics. So as I mentioned, all of our activities would be aligned to these 4 objectives. So this year we have conducted few sessions. I think we have couple more, 1 or 2 more sessions this year that will be organized by Engineering SIG. So if you are interested to join, to contribute, or just to know more about the SIG, you can contact me through my email or my phone number, and I would be very much welcome your involvement with the SIG. Okay, so that's a little bit of brief introduction about the SIG. So without further ado, I would pass the baton to Dr. Ibrahim, who is a very dear friend of mine. I've known him for a few years now. It will not be a justice for me to introduce him because he has a long list of resume. So I would pass the introduction for him to introduce himself and straight away after that share his session for this event. Okay, Dr. Ibrahim, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Adham, for many reasons. Okay. Not only for introducing me, but also giving me the opportunity to conduct this presentation that I hope will not last very long. I think it will take about 1 hour each. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the SIG specifically, as well as HFEM in general, and not to forget everyone who has sacrificed their Saturday morning to join this webinar. I think it's a great sacrifice to listen to someone talking about human error on a Saturday morning, when I think most people would be more happy being at the beach or in the shopping complex or in the park with their families. So once again, Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. So as mentioned by Dr. Radin, I'm Dr. Ibrahim Taib. I'm an assistant professor at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. My background is actually in biomedical science. So I did my degree in biomedical science at UKM. When I joined the university, IIUM, I kind of shifted, into human factors. So I did my master's in human factors at University of Nottingham. So I did my master's by coursework about 1 year there. And it was there that I started my journey on trying to better understand about human errors. And that include doing a short assignment under the lead Professor John Wilson, who I recall asked me to write something on medical errors. And it's through that introduction and the subsequent interest that later when I did my PhD in UNSW, I did my PhD on medical error classification systems, all of which has to do with what I will be talking about this morning. So just give me a moment while I reshare my slides. So the topic that I shall be talking about this morning is on the human factors perspective of human errors. When I was given the opportunity to talk about something for this slot, I wanted to talk about human errors, primarily because based on my interaction with members of the industry, with the general public, my acquaintances, and sometimes with people with a background in OSH, I felt that there may be some misconceptions about what human error is. Okay, and as a result, the danger from misunderstanding what human error is that because our understanding affects how we analyze human errors, it also affects how we manage human errors later on. Now, as a result, okay, it is unsurprising that some organizations are facing problems in trying to prevent the recurrence of human errors. So they notice that human errors occur in their organization and they attempt to do something about it. Yet, despite their best efforts, apparently the human error that they see, that they have identified and tried to prevent, occurs again. And this repeats many times. And sometimes some people, just give up, okay? And they may accept human error as something that they can't really prevent. Now that is somewhat true, okay? So in this short lecture, okay, I shall try to give some information that I know. Okay, so I'll be sharing some of the knowledge that I have, which is very limited. Okay, I am sure that among those who are watching this live or the recording later on, I'm pretty sure a lot of people knows about this topic more than I do. Okay, having said that, I'll try my best to explain it as best as possible, seeing that a lot of people have sacrificed their Saturday morning to be with me now online. Okay. All right. Let's just take a look at some cases of when mishaps, catastrophes, accidents occur, not just due to technical failures, but also failures attributed to humans. Okay. So the first is a friendly fire incident that happened in Afghanistan around half a decade ago. Okay, so this is actually taken from a newspaper article, I believe by the Washington Post. Okay, so what happened at that time was there was a group of soldiers who were in combat, okay, with the Taliban, I think, all right, or was it ISIS? I can't remember. So anyway, during the firefight, okay, this group of American soldiers, some of whom I believe are special forces members, okay, they actually requested close air support. So close air support is when they might send an aircraft, okay, to provide support by dropping bombs, launching rockets, and so on. Now, what happened was that instead of dropping the bomb on the location where the Taliban or ISIS were, the B-1 bomber, okay, actually dropped the ordnance close to the American forces. Okay. Now, during the investigation, there were a couple of things that they found out. When the bomb was dropped, okay, the pilot, okay, wasn't really sure about the location of the friendly forces, the people that the pilot was supporting. Okay. In addition to that, there was some miscommunication between those on the ground and those managing the close air support. All right. So in the end, there were a lot of factors that they found out, okay, and they listed. All right. But human error was actually attributed as one of the contributing factor. Okay, so even in a well-organized organization, highly trained, disciplined, okay, like in the military, okay, there is actually a lot of incidents such as this, okay, and that has to do with a lot of factors, right, that I shall try to raise in my presentation. Now, this is an example from the military. Let's look at an example maybe closer to home, okay? So not geographically, but something that we might encounter throughout our life, okay? So, and that is in healthcare. So this is an incident that occurred, was concluded, sorry, not too long ago in America. So basically, this nurse, okay, was found guilty of homicide because she actually made a medication error, okay, whereby she actually gave the wrong drug or medication to the patient, okay. So what happened was when she was trying to retrieve the correct medication, okay, the system had some sort of problem, okay. So in order to overcome the problem, she override the system, okay. And in overriding the system, okay, after that, she actually retrieved the wrong medication, okay. And now on the surface, it looks like something that she should not have done. It looks like she was careless and negligent, okay? But when you look at the case much closer, you'll see that this action of overriding the system is actually something that has been going on many times already, also involving other nurses, okay? So there's a problem that is not limited to what happened on that day, but actually what has happened before then in the system itself, okay? And I think as most of us here, I believe has a background in ergonomics or human factors. And therefore, we try to understand work in a scientific way. In particular, we try to look at how does the system affect our performance in trying to understand why failures happen, okay? So in this case, all right, as a human factors practitioner, researcher, scientist, or believer, or whatever term that can describe yourself, right? What we should be doing if we were investigating a similar scenario would be to not focus on the person, okay, but rather look at the system, because our core belief is that the human's performance is not independent from the system where the human is. Okay, and that's a very important basic concept that permeates all the theories about why accidents happen or errors occur from decades ago to this day. Okay, so if you have a basic idea about how human factors work, in my opinion, you're already in your journey of understanding accidents and errors in a very correct way already. Okay, of course, there's more to what human errors is, okay, and that is what I will try to explain, okay, to within the limits of my capabilities, okay. And to borrow a phrase from Dr. Radin, I cannot do justice to the topic, okay. Not only in terms of the time that I shall be using, which is roughly about 1 hour each, but also because of the scope of knowledge, right? Human error is such a broad knowledge, okay, that it's impossible to know everything and master everything, okay? So for today, this morning, okay, I shall be giving a short introduction on what human error is, okay, including how do we define human error? When we say human error, what do we mean? Okay, we'll also look at some examples of statistics of the frequency of human errors and how many % of accidents are believed to have been caused by human error. Okay. Following that, I shall be talking about the two major perspectives on what human error is. So you have the traditional, the layman view of what human error is, which is what we call the person approach or the person model. Okay, and that's where you have a tendency to blame people for why human error occurs or accidents occur. All right. On the other hand, I shall discuss about the system approach, okay, which is in line with what we understand as human factors practitioner, researcher, scientist, academician, okay, which is instead of looking at the person, we shall focus on the system's influence or impact on the humans or people's performance, okay. Now after that, I shall go a bit more technical and talk about some of the theories and models of human error. Now, I understand that for some people, they dislike what can be regarded as heavy topics, okay? And I agree, okay? But at the same time, I feel that in order to advance our understanding, we should slowly expose ourselves to more complicated ideas, okay? So for theories and models of human error, I will start with some of the ideas put forth by one of the founding fathers of human error as a discipline, which is James Reason, okay, Professor James Reason. I believe he's the emeritus professor at Manchester University. Maybe he's no longer working there, I'm not sure. But he has contributed so much towards our understanding of what human error is and why accidents occur. Okay, and for that, I shall be talking about how Reason classified the different types of unsafe acts. Okay, and following that, I shall be talking about his other more popular work, which is the Swiss cheese model, which is one of the most popular model of how things fail in a system. Okay, I shall also be presenting on some of the ideas that Reason has written about what can be done to make a system safer, as well as what are the problems that plagues or infects, because Reason uses the word similar to how healthcare, describes the problems that afflicts patients, right? Pathogens, right? So I shall also briefly talk about what Reason has put forth regarding the problems that plague many organizations that make them more susceptible to human error as well as accidents. Okay. After that, I'll move on to some of the ideas put forth by another giant in the field of safety, who is Jens Rasmussen. Okay, so Rasmussen has influenced so many disciplines, whether we're talking about human-computer interaction, system reliability, safety, accident analysis and prevention, many others. Okay, and that's because he has actually written a lot of widely applicable ideas. So I shall be talking about his idea of how a social technical system actually functions in terms of managing human error, unsafe practices. Okay, including a tool that he has developed with his colleague, which is called HFEM. Okay, which can be used in in a variety of ways. Okay, and has been used in many industries for many types of catastrophes. Okay, and lastly, before I conclude, okay, I shall be talking about high reliability organizations. Okay, so you have a Reason who puts forth a lot of work based on psychology, Jens Rasmussen's ideas, a lot of them based on cognitive systems engineering. And then when we talk about high reliability organizations, basically we're dealing with safety culture. Okay, so what are the safety culture that make high reliability organizations highly reliable? And maybe we'll discuss a bit on what does it mean to be reliable in the first place. Okay, because there's actually some slight differences between how we understand safety, decades ago and how we understand them currently. Okay, now I think there is a lot of talk about resilience. Okay, rather than just failures and errors. Okay, so before I conclude, I shall be talking a bit about high reliability organizations or HROs. Okay, all right, so how can we define human error? Now, if you look at the literature, okay, if you talk to different consultants, you're going to find that a lot of people have provided a variety of definitions of what human error is. Okay, I like to stick with James Reason's definition, not just because he's one of the pioneers in this field, but at least in healthcare, I find that his definition is often used, probably because of its being simple enough to understand. Okay, and it's clear what it means. There are other scientists, researchers who offer different definitions because they are different understanding and explanation of what human error is. Okay, but I won't touch on that. Okay, so for James Reason, okay, his definition of human error is all those occasions in which a planned sequence of mental and physical activities fails to achieve its intended outcome, and when these failures cannot be attributed to some chance agency. Okay, so this is a short story of when James Reason became interested in studying about human error. So he is a psychologist. So decades ago, he wasn't researching on psychology. He was researching on, I believe, sensory and perception. Okay. Now, one day when he was preparing tea, okay, he's British, so preparing tea is normal. Okay. While he was preparing tea, right, he was supposed to put, some of the ingredients in the teapot. Okay, but what happened was, instead of putting, tea, he actually put cat food inside the teapot. Okay. Now, the reason why that happened was during the process of the preparation, okay, there's this cat that was meowing to him, asking for food, okay. Now, because of that interruption, all right, the process, okay, the pre-programmed process and in his mind on what are the steps to prepare tea, okay, was interrupted by the cat, and it triggers another process, okay. And that process is to prepare food for the cat. Okay, so you have a situation where an interruption or distraction actually interferes with the process, which led to a human error being committed. In this case, a slip. Okay, so instead of putting the ingredients for tea, he actually put cat food. Okay, so it was that incident that triggered his interest to study human error further, and the rest is, of course, history. Okay, so now in this definition, right, the thing that needs to be highlighted is that there's actually a plan sequence. Okay, all right, so there's some types of plan, and whatever that is being done fails to achieve the intended outcome. Okay, so there's a failure of achieving. In this case, in his case, he wanted to prepare tea, but instead of preparing tea, he fails to achieve that because he actually put cat food inside the teapot. Now, this error has nothing to do with some chance agency, so some random event. Okay, it has to do with some problems with the processes. Okay, because if we deal with chance, right, then it's not something that is within our control. Okay, and therefore, there's not much you can do about it. Okay, but when we look at Reason's explanation of the different types of errors in a short while, we'll see that the different types of errors have some sort of underlying processes in the mind. Okay, that actually, when we understand them better, allows us to prevent them from occurring in the first place. Okay. All right. So some statistics on human error. It is widely believed that 80% of industrial accidents in various domains, including maritime, healthcare, chemical plants, and I'm sure there are other industries as well, okay, are due to human error. Okay, there are some researchers or scientists who disagree with this estimation. Okay, but I think regardless of the actual percentage, I believe we all agree that human error occurs in frequent enough to raise our concerns about people's safety, people's health. Okay, human error is believed to be involved in many disasters and catastrophes. Okay, so in the past, in the 80s, you have disasters like the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor. Was it 80s, late 70s? Can't remember. The Clapham Junction train crash. Okay, the Piper Alpha offshore fire, and many other more recent catastrophes. Okay, if I am not mistaken, there's actually a paper that estimates that in America, around 250,000 people die each year because of preventable medical errors. So that's 250,000 Americans each year. Now you compare that with the number of people who die due to automobile accidents, cancer. That's actually a lot, right? But again, there is always a second opinion. Some people say that frequency, okay, is not really realistic for a number of reasons. But regardless of the differences of opinion, everyone agrees that the rate of medical errors in American hospitals is really, really high. Okay. Now, what about in Malaysia? Unfortunately, in my opinion, we don't have enough data to actually make a very good, accurate estimation. Okay, and that's because of certain issues. Okay, but again, I believe that our rate of medical errors in the Malaysian healthcare system would not be too different compared to industrialized countries, okay, developed countries, where the rate is actually unacceptably high. In fact, one could argue that even a death of a single person per day is actually unacceptable, okay, because we're dealing with human lives. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are actually two different perspectives on human errors. Okay, so when we say perspective, what I meant or what researchers mean is that not only how they occur, but also how do we actually address them. Okay, so there are actually two major divisions. The first is what we can call the person approach. Okay, the second, the system approach. Okay, so what is the difference between the person approach and the system approach? Okay, now the person approach is actually an approach that has been used for a long time and is really widespread. Okay, it's almost like it's the more intuitive thing to do. And to be honest, I agree, and that's because there's some normal human thinking that gives rise to the beliefs in the person approach, okay, which I shall talk about in a moment, okay. Now, when a person subscribes to a person approach about why human errors occur and how to resolve them, usually they will actually focus on the unsafe acts, okay, and because of that limited scope, right, they usually blame the workers for the human error or the resulting accidents. And the reason why that is so is because there is a belief that when human errors are committed, okay, it is always due to someone who is careless, they're forgetful, they're negligent, or any other negative trait. It's almost like in an organization, if everyone is good, if everyone's competent, human error will not occur. That is the belief of the person approach. And mind you, there's a lot of organizations that actually subscribe to this, okay? And because of that, it creates pressure on people in ways that damages the organization in the long run, okay, which I shall explain after this, right? Now, in response to this belief, right, a lot of people in management, when they try to prevent human errors from occurring, okay, what they do is that they utilize people-centric approaches, like warning people, okay, don't do this again. If you do, something bad is going to happen. Or they shame, okay, or there's litigation, penalties, and so on. All of which share the same trait, which is to target the individual, okay. Now, the logic behind this is that if we target the individual, other people who look at us, who see what we do, they will be afraid to do human error. Why? Well, because human error is something that is born from people's weaknesses, carelessness, behavior, okay? So you want other people not to commit human error, as if human error is something that we decide to do. Now think about it. There have been cases where patients die in the operating room, not because of their condition or disease or pathological situation, okay? Some of them occur because of mistakes made by surgeons, nurses, medications prepared in the pharmacy department, and so on. Okay, now think about it. A lot of these people have been performing really well for a number of years. Okay, so if you look around, there are cases of the one I remember that happened in Europe. There was a nurse who has been performing very well, you know, throughout her career, decades, right? But she actually committed a medical error which led to the patient dying. Okay, now if we say that the problem is with the person, how do we explain that a person has been performing so well for many years, and suddenly, the person switch into a low-performing individual in overnight or in a moment? Okay, that does not make sense, right? And what this creates is a lot of guilt on the behalf of those who commit human errors, okay? Because they feel that when human errors occur, because human errors are committed by bad people, therefore they are bad. All right. And the nurse in that case that I was referring to, she actually took her own life because she could not withstand the guilt. All right. Because we have to remember, a lot of healthcare workers, when they decide to work in healthcare, some of them actually did so due to altruistic reasons. Okay, they have this strong desire to help people. Okay, but when they themselves did something that harms a patient, especially if the patient is a child, okay, the psychological impact is very strong. Okay, and this is what I believe Decker called the, or Woods, I can't remember, with all due respect to them, the second victim. So the victim of human errors are not necessarily the receiving end of the error. It's also those who commit the errors in the first place. Okay. Now, why do we blame people? Okay, there's a lot of reasons, right? And this has been discussed by a number of researchers. Okay. Number one is that there's this fundamental attribution error where there is a belief that when failures occur, it's because people are just weak. Okay, they have something to do with their weakness. All right. In addition to that, there's this illusion of free will, meaning that people are capable of choosing to be safe. Why do you choose to be unsafe? All right. So there's this idea that the reason why a person committed human error is because they intentionally did something that led them to committing the error, which is problematic. Okay. And then there's this just world hypothesis, which states that bad things happen to bad people. All right. The reason why this happened to you is because you're a bad person. Right. Everyone else don't have this problem because generally we're all good. Okay. So you're a bad apple. Okay. The other thing is that this has to do with the processes. Usually when we investigate accidents or incidents, there is a danger of being exposed to what is called a hindsight bias, which is when we try to judge what happens in the past using our understanding of the present. Okay, say when we try to investigate an accident involving automobile that was driven at night and hit a pedestrian. Okay, now maybe we will use our hindsight and say, the driver should have known better. Drive slowly. It was at night, and usually there'll be pedestrians if you cannot see them, so you don't drive, close to the curb and so on. We are forming ideas because we understood the event after it has occurred. However, if we were in the person's shoes, the driver itself, if we were there at the time of incident, maybe we will not have actually had the same idea. Okay, so sometimes investigators may actually form ideas about what happened in the past using their knowledge of the present. And this actually, becomes an obstacle to understanding why accidents happen or human error occurs in a better way. All right. And then last but not least, I think this is quite prominent, the convenience of it, the satisfaction of it, and finding a scapegoat. Okay. So if you recall in the past, there has been some incidents in Malaysia where a spokesman for the company will say that, our company values safety, blah, blah, blah. And there was a worker who did not follow the SOP, we shall investigate. And if there was any problem, we shall punish and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the focus is on trying to find an individual to be blamed so that the company's image, the organization's image is detached from the mishap. It means that this all happened because of that person. Our organization is mantap, titop, okay? We're great. It's just that one person, all right? And therefore, the solution is to throw away that person. Because once you throw away that person, there will be no more problem because the person is a problem, okay? It's very rare that you hear during a press conference, you will hear people say, we have identified some problems in some of the protocols that we have been utilizing for some years. We seek to address this immediately by re-examining how they function, blah, 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 blah. because that will be admitting that the organization itself, as an organization, right, has actually some weaknesses. And a lot of organizations are very careful in protecting their image. Okay, and we know how satisfying it is to blame someone, right? When we say ini salah dia lah, satisfying, because we shift all the blame, all the negative energy at blaming that person, because we always want to aim, our unsatisfaction towards something. It cannot be the system, because the system is not a person that you can point to. All right. So these are some of the reasons why it's quite prevalent to blame people. Now, the impact of the person approach is that you're not going to identify the factors in the system, okay, or what James Reason called the latent conditions, right? And from a human factors perspective, this is highly dangerous because you're not resolving the true cause of the problem, okay? The focus on blaming and shaming can have a psychological impact. As I mentioned before, there is the idea of a second victim, which is really, really harmful. We are losing capable people due to psychological, emotional issues that they may experience after they commit errors, whether we're talking about healthcare, aviation, and so on. Okay. Now, even if we do not lose them through resignation, there is a danger that their morale will be pretty low. Okay, they are less enthusiastic about their work because they believe they are hiding something very dark. Okay, and the reason why they are hiding is because they are working in an environment that discourages them from admittedly talking about the errors that they have committed. Okay, and I'll try to talk about this further later on. Okay, and then there's this illusion of safety after punishing staff. Okay, once you punish a staff, there's always this belief problem solved. Right? Why? Because if the source of the problem is the person, and if we punish the person, therefore is taken care of. Even better, if we fire the person, that person is no longer with our organization, and therefore no more problem. Okay, very convenient, but inaccurate or wrong. Okay, and lastly, okay, this will impair reporting and therefore organizational learning about how to respond to errors. And this is a very important issue. This is pretty widespread in healthcare. I believe it's also widespread in other industries, not so in aviation. Okay, Captain Kanan is not here, but I'm sure he can talk about some of the things that they have done in aviation. Okay, regarding the creation of an environment, system, or culture that allows people to talk about errors more freely. Okay, now, in contrast to the person approach, we have the system approach where error is not a cause, it's actually a consequence. It means it is actually the end of a series of process. Okay, so error alone does not actually make much sense. Okay, if you're trying to understand why accidents happen. Okay, we have to actually look at what is it that causes that error to occur in the first place. So some people have used in the literature, okay, terms such as error-provoking conditions, performance-shaping factors. So these are all things, okay, does not have to be an object, it could be something abstract, okay, in the system that actually affects a person so much so that a person's probability of committing an error actually increases. Right? And some use the word error traps, okay, which is even more easy to understand. So there's something in the system that traps people into committing errors. And therefore, if the approach looks at the systemic factors as being one of the source of problems, therefore the countermeasures should actually address them. Okay, and I intentionally put the phrase "to err is human," okay, because it is actually a fundamental understanding of how to manage errors effectively. Once we accept that people will make errors, therefore we cease to try and prevent them entirely. Instead, what we do is, while we try to decrease the occurrence, we also seek to create a system that allows errors to be managed before they actually create a negative impact. So the system is more resilient towards the occurrence of errors. And that's because the system expects errors to occur. Okay, but if you use a person approach, right, you say, now as long as everyone's good, then no error is going to happen. Okay, as long as everyone's competent, no error is going to happen. Okay, no one here has lesen terbang or something. Okay, and therefore we're not expecting any errors to happen. If that is the belief, then there's going to be a problem when an errors eventually happen. Okay. So this leads to the idea that we need to create what is called a just culture. Okay, and a just culture allows people to talk more freely about errors. Okay, and that's because a just culture differentiates between a person intentionally, negligently committing something unsafe, and a person who does something that, yes, can be categorized as unsafe, but that person did so because of provocations from the system. Okay, so there needs to be a differentiation, right? And because of this differentiation, right, people are more willing to express their opinion about why errors occur rather than keep it inside. Because if there's a culture of blame, right, what will happen is that even though a person sees an error, okay, that person would not actually divulge it, talk about it, admit it. As a result, whatever is causing the error to occur will still remain in the system, provoking other people who will also keep quiet about it, and the vicious cycle just continue. All right. And I've heard of some cases which I cannot state here that involves deaths of people. All right. That I believe can be attributed to something in the system. Okay. But you know, people are not willing to talk about it, right? Because of fear of being blamed for such incidents. All right, so this is something that researchers have tried to develop, okay, to differentiate between a person genuinely being negligent, all right, intentionally doing something that is harmful to people, from the situations where an error was committed but is not intentional and is due to provocations in the system. Okay, due to limitation of time, I'm not going to go into detail, but just want to point out there are efforts to actually differentiate, because one criticism of the just culture is that people argue, wait, if we cannot punish people for making mistake, then everyone will not be afraid to make mistake. Yes, that's true. We're not trying to let go everyone, turn a blind eye to everything. What we're trying to do is we're trying to separate genuine negligence, unsafe acts from cases where people are just being human beings. Okay? They're just people and they make mistake, and it so happens that someone or something was harmed. Okay, and they tried their best, but it still happened. So we're trying to separate the two. Okay, and with this tool, it actually allows us to try to differentiate, okay, between the two, which is very important, because the moment you lose the ability to differentiate between these two types of scenarios, there will not be a trust from the workers to the management that, yes, the management is being just. And therefore, if I can't trust the management, I better keep my mouth shut. Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's that. Okay. Right. So now let's move on to Jim's Reason's classification of unsafe acts, a very popular taxonomy that have been used in many industries. I'm pretty sure that there are those among us online here this morning, okay, or watching online, have used or at least seen Reason's classification of unsafe acts before. Okay, I'm not sure how, whether, for example, NIOSH is teaching this in their SHO classes, but to me, this is something that is worth, you know, studying about if you want to try and understand human error better, because, you know, we can't have limited knowledge about how to tackle human errors, especially because it's quite a complicated phenomena. Okay, so Reason actually classified unsafe acts into a number of different categories. So he proposed this classification system, or what we call a taxonomy, right? So if you are familiar with the animal kingdom, we have a taxonomy, right? Like Panthera tigris is tiger, I think. Panthera, lion, it's a lion, I don't know, okay? But you differentiate between different animals according to certain features that they have. And the reason why you differentiate them is because it's meaningful to do so. With errors, it's meaningful to actually differentiate between intended action and unintended action. And within unintended action, slips, lapses, mistakes, and so on. There's a reason for why, okay, we need to categorize them differently. Okay, now let's take a closer look. Okay, one of the things that Reason did in the beginning of the classification is to differentiate between errors and violation. I cannot stress this enough. Okay, I have interacted with people from the industry who actually group them together. So violations and errors are treated in the same way, which is incorrect. Okay, the reason being that errors are unintended. So a person commits something unintentionally, whereas violations is something that deviates from what you plan because they want to do so. Now, in terms of handling these two scenarios, it can't be the same because it has to do with whether there's a presence or absence of intention. All right. So that needs to be managed in a very different way. Now, in terms of errors themselves, okay, there are three broad categories, and this categorization is based on Rasmussen's work. All right, and Rasmussen actually made a significant contribution to various fields when he proposed the SRK framework, which differentiates between the skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based degree of conscious control over our activities. So one way of understanding this is that our level of attention, our level of conscious control over what we do is different throughout the day. It depends on what kind of task and scenario we're in. For example, if you're tying your shoelace, right? Do you actually think about every step while you're doing it? You don't, right? You put your foot into the shoe, you say, okay, first I'm going to take the left one, shoelace, over the right one. Okay, what do I do next? Oh yeah, I have to make a loop. No one does that unless it's your first time or it's your fifth time, okay, when you're a kid. But now it's not, okay? There's a pre-programmed process or steps in your head that when you start, it will just run automatically, okay? And we also see this among drivers, okay? So experienced drivers, right? When they drive, they don't actually focus a lot on their driving. They can talk to someone. Some people are texting, which is nuts, okay? Don't text while driving. Okay? There are people who do that, right? Manipulate the radio and so on while driving, and that's because it's an semi-automatic behavior. Because they're so used to it that in their mind there are specific like autonomous response about what to do depending on the environment. Okay, whereas someone who has just learned how to drive, right, they are functioning at what we call the knowledge base or rule base, whereby they have to actually think very hard about what they need to do while driving. Okay, now because of that, different levels of control have different types of errors. So with skill based, so these are highly practiced, okay, involving very limited conscious monitoring. These are slips and lapses. So slips is when you're supposed to put A into the cup, but instead you put B. You wanted to say this, instead you say that. Okay, it's something like Freudian slip. Okay, lapses on the other hand has to do with our memory. Okay, rule based has to do with using rules that we store in our mind on what needs to be done according to the situation. Okay, so if X, then Y. So that's a rule-based behavior. Okay, and finally, knowledge-based. Okay, this is when we are very highly conscious. It's very slow, effortful, and happens when we're in a novel situation. You fly to Africa. You're at the airport. You're figuring out where do I need to go, or how do I use this vending machine. You're going to think very hard. Do I do this or that? But when you're using a vending machine in Malaysia, you don't really think that much, right? Because it is all intuitive. It's something that you're already skillful at, right? And therefore, the errors that occur in different situations are not the same. Okay, so with slips, all right, they are skill-based. Okay, they involve correct plan but failure to carry out the action as planned. So you want to do this, instead you accidentally do that. Okay, sounds very, how you say, innocuous. Is that the correct expression? Right, when James Reason put cat food inside the teapot, doesn't sound very dangerous. But imagine if that happens to a nurse who's preparing a drug to administer. Okay, it's the same process. It's just the context is different, and that's why we have to understand why errors occur. Now, slips are associated with observable actions because you can see that something did not go according to plan, especially if the person who commits the error, okay, and attentional failures. So why such errors occur have to do with attention. So sometimes there are distraction. So one example, right, that I can think of right now is in some hospitals, when a nurse is preparing the medication to be administered to the patient, some of them actually wear a vest that says "Do not talk to me." Okay, and that's to remind their colleagues that they're in a very critical process. They're trying to prepare medication where one decimal point could mean life or death, right? So they need to focus, and that is why they need to be shielded from any interruption, and that includes people talking to them. So maybe you have experienced this before. You're calculating something, and it took you like 7 minutes. Okay, this one time, this one time, this one using calculator, and suddenly your friend say, "Hey, you know what's the score last night?" And in trying to answer that person's question, suddenly you forgot, okay, what was the number, and you say, "Dah, aku kena start balik. I have to start all over again." Okay, and you throw the calculator at your friend. Okay, so this is an example of attentional issues that can provoke the occurrence of slips. Okay? Next, at the skill base level is, as I said before, lapse. So this is when you fail to execute something because there's a missing step in your mind. Okay, and this has to do, among others, with memory failures. This has happened a lot of times, maybe to you as well. Okay, but to me, I've experienced this. I leave the house, I forgot to do this, do that, forgot to bring this, bring that, I have to go back and drive back home, you know, because of lapses. And that is why if you see like in aviation, right, before they actually fly, okay, the pilots will do like a pre-flight check. They use a checklist, and it's also used in some operating theaters by surgeons. Now, they have done that for many years already. Theoretically, they have memorized everything in the checklist, but they still go through the checklist because there is a genuine concern that what if I miss one of them? Okay, somebody could be harmed. So therefore, even though it's inconvenient, it adds up how many minutes to my day of work. Okay, I will still do it because I am genuinely concerned about errors occurring. Now, as we move on to a higher level of process control, okay, you have mistakes which are divided into rule-based, knowledge-based. Okay, so rule-based has to do with rules that we store in our mind. So pre-packaged processes or solutions. Knowledge is when we try to figure out something, you know, when we're in a novel situation. Okay, so rule-based and knowledge-based require different remediation, so to speak. Okay, both of them are mistakes. It could be that they're not being taught on the correct rules to use in that situation. It could be that they're not supposed to be exposed in another situation. And that's why sometimes, you know, you hear people undergoing simulations training because they want to be exposed to as many types of environment as possible so that they are not exposed to a truly novel situation when the real scenario, when they actually carry out their job. So like in aviation, you have simulators, right? You want them to be exposed to different weather conditions. What if one of the engine is not functioning and so on? Okay, you want them to better react to this novel situation because you do not want them to commit knowledge-based mistakes. Okay, now moving on to unintentional unsafe acts, and this is violations. Okay, so violations are intentional, and the problem with violations is that it has to do with motivation. Sometimes it has to do with morale, the disbelief, the loss of faith with the organization or the SOPs. All right. So as such, right, there needs to be measures along that line as well. Okay, things like reward, sanctions. Okay, as well as supervision. Okay, and other things. Right. So at the very least, I hope here it's important that we can differentiate between errors and violation. Do not mix them together. They require different solutions. Okay, so like I said before, we have to differentiate human error and violations. skill-based errors related to attention and memory during execution, rule and knowledge-based errors related to planning, violations require motivational and perhaps organizational interventions, perhaps after understanding why those violations occur in the first place. Now, moving on to James Reason's Swiss cheese model. Okay, now you may have seen this model before. Basically, what Reason tries to explain is that when accidents happen, okay, they are actually caused by failures in the layers of defense within the system. All right, so each defense is actually represented by one layer of Swiss cheese. Okay, not like the Kraft cheese that we usually find in our supermarket. Okay, the cheese that we see in the Tom and Jerry cartoons. Okay, which has holes in them. Right. So the idea being that the trajectory or the development of the accident, okay, will be stopped if there's a one layer of defense that prevents it from progressing. Okay. The problem is that this layer of defense has holes. Okay, and these holes are created due to what we call latent conditions or pathogens. Okay. All right. So there could be anything, things like organizational issues. Okay. Poor support from management, poor maintenance. So these are things that make the defenses in our system to be more fragile, weak. All right. Now, the thing about these holes is that they're not static. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're elsewhere. And this explains why in some organizations, you see them having problems in the system, in the organization, yet there's no accident. And that's due to chance. Okay, so this model actually says that, or implies that, it's only when the hole is aligned, because you can see that the line is actually straight line. Okay, it's not crooked. So if the holes, even though they're there, if it's not at a location that's aligned with the previous holes, then the progression of the accident will stop. Okay, and it will not occur. Okay, so that explains how when we see some organization, it's actually due to luck that they're not experiencing more accidents. Okay, now with this model, there's a lot of emphasis on the organization and the system. Okay, the human is actually at the final end or the sharp end. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of organizations, we tend to focus on the sharp end. Okay, who actually commit the errors, and we actually disregard what happens before them. Okay, so the danger here is if we do not have defenses in depth, meaning a lot of defenses in place, all right, or if we have our defenses in place, okay, we have things in the system that actually weakens the defense and allows accidents to still progress and happen. Okay, so it's not just the presence of defense, but also whether there are things that are undermining the obstacles, or the shield or defenses against accidents and errors. Okay, now the outcome of the Swiss model includes the development of a lot of error classification systems. So this is one of the classification systems that is quite prominent. Okay, this one is used in oil and gas. It's based on HFACS, Human Factors Accident Classification System, I believe. Originally developed for, I think it was aviation. Okay, but it's been used in medicine as well. So the idea being that whenever there's an error, you can actually assign a certain category on it. Okay, based on what type of error was it? Was there any problem in terms of individual, environmental? Was there any unsafe supervision? Was there any organizational influences? And if you have a higher layer, you might be looking at the regulatory framework. Okay, so by doing so, what you can do is that you can start to tabulate, right? So let's say you have multiple errors, okay, throughout the year, and you analyze each of the errors using this classification system. Therefore, you can kind of have like a statistics that say, okay, the majority of the accidents that occur in our company is basically something to do with contractor environment, right? So through this frequencies approach, you can start to prioritize certain types of accidents, okay, to be managed, because you can't handle everything or manage everything at the same time. Okay. Now there is some weakness with this approach, and that's whether the classification system that you use is really appropriate. There's issues like validity and reliability. So the studies that we have done in the past, we have looked at the reliability of these classification systems, including whether if two different people use the same classification system, would they be used in a similar way? If they are not, then the output of the classification system is not reliable, which is harmful to the organization because you're actually managing according to data that is not accurate. Okay, so if your company is using a similar classification system, try to think about whether you think it's reliable, whether it's valid. Okay, and perhaps get some help in try to examine whether they work as you hope they would. Okay, because the danger is that they will actually guide you in the wrong way. Okay, now Reason talks about what is called vulnerable system syndrome. This is a syndrome or characteristics of organizations that can actually make them more vulnerable to adverse events, catastrophes, accidents, and so on. Okay, and the reason why they have this what he called VSS is because number one, they blame people for bad outcomes. Number two, they live in denial, they suppress or cover up weaknesses. Number three, and this I think is quite common, is the pursuit of wrong excellence. Okay, so sometimes companies or organizations rely on indices or statistics like lost time to injuries as a marker to gauge whether human errors can occur at their workplace, when in fact it has very little association. In fact, when we look at some of the accidents, there are researchers who argue that a lot of these major catastrophes, right? If you look at the statistics before the catastrophe occurs, you can see that the statistics show that the organization is in a good shape. Okay, so the statistics does not actually truly reveal the state of the safety of the organization, right? So we have to be careful about that, right? What are we using as quality or safety indicators? Now, what are the steps to actually make risk management better, according to James Reason? Okay, number one, team management and communication. Okay, so team-related factors are really critical. So they are found this in aviation. And what we can do is that we can actually have formal training on how to manage performance and how people can actually work together and communicate much better. So one of the projects that we carry out in IIUM involve teamwork and communication training in hospitals. So we try to apply what have been used in aviation for many years already, but this time apply in a district hospital. And the response that we got was quite positive. Okay, they've mentioned that they've never been trained to do this, and they found that it's very helpful because it addresses certain issues that is prevalent in healthcare. Right, so we were really happy about the output of that study. Okay, next is the tasks and situations. Okay, we need to identify what are the tasks and situations that actually provokes people to commit errors. Okay, so for example, we look at the influence of certain tasks or situation, like time shortage, right? You actually increase the risk factor of errors to occur by 11 times. So when you're in a time shortage, you're short of time, the risk of error occurring is very, very high. Okay. And then there are other things like inadequate checking, poor instructions, right? It's 3 times more. Okay. So we have to identify whether this type of high risk tasks and situations occur in our organization, company, or environment. The thing here, though, is that in order for us to know about such tasks, such situations, we need to have a reporting system whereby people are willing to actually report that there is a problem in the workplace. Okay, but if there's no just culture, if there's a culture of blame, people would not report, full stop. Okay, and that is why a lot of organizations are managed in the dark, and they're blind towards what exactly is happening in their organization. Okay, so I remember attending a conference, and one of the aviation human factors specialists said that there's one aviation company in Asia, okay, which I cannot name. They're so particular about the possibility of accidents, unsafe acts occurring, so much so that one of their staff actually submitted a report to the reporting system about a situation where she actually broke one of her nail or something while using a cup in the pantry. Okay, when I heard that, I thought it must be some sort of joke, okay, but then I figured out, okay, their sensitivity, their tolerance towards unsafe acts, okay, has reached a point where even such incidents are viewed as important enough. Now, whether something happens, something is managed regarding what occurs in the pantry, that I do not know. Okay, but the point here, they reach a culture where safety is taken very seriously. Okay, and there's another story. I'm really short of time. I really apologize. I heard this story from one of the directors, I believe a director of the Johns Hopkins Hospital from the US. So he was proudly saying that one day he was doing his auditing, his rounds. Okay, so as a director, once in a while he has to walk around just to make sure everything in the hospital is okay. So one day while he was doing his rounds, right, one of the janitors, the person who mops the floor, comes over to him. So this lady says, doctor, I'm very concerned about this mop. Okay, it's not effective when I try to mop, right? And I'm concerned, blah blah blah. And he was beaming with pride when he talked about this in the conference. And I was thinking, apa benda lah dia nak cakap ni kan? Then he explained that the belief, the culture of taking things seriously about safety, right? It permeates the different layers of the organization. So much so that the person who mops the floor understands it. Okay, so you can forget about surgeons, pharmacists. We're talking about the janitors, the general workers. Even they understand about their role in safety. So what kind of culture is that, right? So that's really, really impressive. Okay? And that can only happen when you take certain steps to improve the organization. Because these are violation-producing conditions. Okay, if you have this, then you're going to increase the risk of people committing violations. Okay, for a number of reasons. Okay, next is organizational. So for effective risk management, okay, so James Gleason argued for the need to regularly assess safety using proper indices or indicators. So they are different according to different industries, which I shall not elaborate further here. Okay. In a different paper, okay, James Gleason also talked about what he called double loop learning. All right, so double loop learning is different compared to single loop learning. So single loop learning is when we realize an incident or accident has happened, we look at what is the cause and we immediately attribute the cause as being related to the accident. But when we talk about double loop, in addition to what we see or what we hear, we also question our assumptions, like maybe there's something else that I've not thought about. Usually we don't do that, right? We have something like confirmation bias. We tend to look for something that we already feel is correct. Betul lah, inilah sebabnya. Okay, but how many of us say, okay, inilah sebabnya, this is the reason, but wait, maybe there's something else that I've not talked about. Okay, I have not thought about. That is something that we rarely do because that takes effort, okay, and takes time, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so what James Gleason stressed on is the need for us as an organization to actually promote double loop learning. Okay, and this is something that I noticed has been practiced in Toyota. Okay, this is not part of the lecture, but Toyota, as some of you know, aware of, especially those in industrial engineering, they have a production system that emphasizes on certain practices, not just on physical, but also organizational. And I find that this is something that they stress on, and perhaps that explains why the quality of their product is quite superior, if I may, compared to their competitors. All right, now that was some of the ideas put forth by James Gleason. Now I'm going to very quickly, okay, short of time, I want to talk about some ideas that Jens Rasmussen actually put forth. Okay, now compared to James Gleason, who actually used a more taxonomic or categorization based of understanding about errors, things like slips, lapses, right? Rasmussen actually utilized a different approach whereby he actually adopted what is called a naturalistic view based on his observation on what actually happens in the workplace, right? So if you talk to people in sociology, okay, some of them actually apply naturalistic approach in understanding what actually goes on, okay, rather than using experiments. So he actually provided some explanation about how a socio-technical system actually manages risks, okay, relating to accidents and so on. Okay, so in his view, okay, an accident actually occurs because hazardous processes are not controlled. Okay, now where does this control comes from? So a socio-technical system, we have different layers. You have the, for example, you have the worker. Above the worker, you have the manager. Above the manager, you have the company. Above the company, you have, I don't know, regulators. Above the regulator, you have I don't know, parliament, and so on, government, and so on. Okay, so you have different layers, and each of these layers is actually controlling the hazardous processes of those that occur below it. So, for example, if you're the manager, you're actually controlling your worker in terms of maybe instructions, orders, and so on. And as a manager, you are being controlled by the company through SOPs, procedures, whatever, okay, guidelines, and so on, right? Now, this is not a one-way interaction. Okay, what happens then is that you actually get feedback from those at the below. Okay, so you have the manager controlling the worker, and in return, the worker is giving feedback to the manager about what actually happened in response to the action being carried out. Okay, now in terms of safety, okay, it's very important that there's this vertical integration of these multiple layers. It means that there's integration between those at the top all the way to those at the bottom. They must be aligned. There must not be conflicts in terms of what the instructions, the feedback. There should be instructions. There should be feedback. Okay, and sometimes when accidents happen, it's because there's no feedback or there's actually poor control. So there's a lot of control theory involved in how Rasmussen actually explains why accidents happen. Okay, and since we don't have the time, okay, and it's not part of my plan, but there are other prominent, brilliant thinkers in safety, right? Like Professor Leveson from MIT, Professor Holnagel from, I can't remember which country, but in Europe, okay? So basically, they also propose some ideas, and especially with Professor Leveson, she also utilized this control theory in trying to explain why catastrophes, accidents happen. Okay. Now, the other thing to understand about a socio-technical system is that, in addition to having this vertical, multi-layer hierarchical socio-technical system where you have the control coming from the top and the feedback coming from the bottom, right? You also have these stressors. Okay, these stressors that creates different environment. So let's say you're a worker, right? You have received instruction from your boss to do ABC. Now, for today, ABC, the instruction, works very well. But tomorrow, that instruction, ABC, may not be 100% suitable. It may only be 90% suitable. Therefore, now you're in a situation where your boss has asked you to do ABC, but you're in an environment due to some changes or pressure that you have to make adjustments. So your instruction is not 100% valid anymore. It's only 90%. That 10%, you have to figure out your own self. All right. So this is where, all right, you have some migration or slight changes in how people do work, right? Now, these slight changes is different to what James Friesen was explaining, as I've shown before, where you have a category like safe, unsafe, skill, rule, knowledge. Okay, here there's migration. There's not categorical. It's that slight movement. Okay, so you have in a social technical system, right, some dynamics, because every day is not the same. Workers, managers, whoever is in the different layer, they have to respond to changing conditions. Not only that, the instruction that they receive from above may not be 100% useful every single day. Okay, you come to work every single day, it's not the same. Okay, it's not truly, how you say, monotonous or similar, or like a replicate. Every day there is some slight changes, and therefore every day what we're doing when we come to work is that we're constantly making minor adjustments to how we do work in order to adapt to the environment. The problem of when accidents happen is that when those adjustments actually lead to a trigger or a release of the accidents occurring. Okay, so this is just to show the different layers. Okay, you have different layers of the hierarchical socio-technical system, and you have control, okay, exerted by the layer above it to the layer below it. Okay, and in each of the controls, okay, there is some judgment interpretation by the respective layers. So they have to interpret what's the instruction. And sometimes instructions are not 100% clear cut because they're not, how you say, fully prescribed. Okay, they don't say first you do this, second you do that. Sometimes it's just like general ideas, and it's up to the worker to actually decipher or navigate in the workplace on how to achieve the objectives. All right, and we have to remember that whatever that occurs is not static; it's dynamic. Okay, there's a lot of changes due to the environment. Okay, which leads to even more adjustments. So adjustments are due to the vagueness or intentional vagueness of the instructions, or because of the changing environment. Okay, next, Rasmussen actually explained how accidents actually gets triggered or is released. All right, so we talk about those adjustments, right? So what he explained was that our performance is actually in this area where there's room to actually make when there's room to actually, let me just, okay, when there's room to actually make changes to our performance. Okay, all right. Now the important thing is that surrounding this area are boundaries. Okay, so there's boundary of economic failure, boundary of unacceptable workload, and there's boundary of functional acceptable performance. Okay, now these boundaries are important because once you actually make adjustments to how you work, sometimes you actually approach the boundaries closer and closer. And that's because of certain gradients. It could be the gradient towards least effort. You know, we have a bias towards doing this the simplest way. Okay, not really cut corners, but if we have a option between doing it simpler and doing it the hard way, we're going to do it the simpler way. That's just an innate bias that most people have. And then there's the management pressure towards efficiency or cost effectiveness. We want to increase the margin of profit, and that's where there might be pressure exerted from the management to the worker, who then adjust their performance or behavior, so much so that they are getting closer and closer to the boundary of safety. Now, the boundary of safety actually has the perceived and the actual. All right. So the perceived is when we feel, okay, this is the limit of how safe we can go. Okay. And then there's the actual, where if you reach the limit, everything's going to go really bad. All right. So that's that error margin. Now, what we want is that we want to increase the error margin so that we don't get very close. Okay. People are very careful in terms of distancing themselves from the boundaries of the acceptable safe performance. Okay. But due to the gradient, okay, you see people becoming closer and closer, more unsafe. All right. Now, if you have watched Top Gun, okay, or maybe I shouldn't spoil it. Okay, but there's a scene in the middle, sorry, in the beginning, involving a plane where Tom Cruise moves closer to the boundary. Okay, I can't say more than that. Okay, I'm going to spoil some, the movie for some of you. Okay, but that is an analogy. Okay, when you get closer and closer, and there's a difference between what you feel is the actual and what is the actual. Okay, and the best thing to do is to actually distance between the actual and the perceived boundary. Okay, so that people stay as far away as possible from the limits. Okay, now the way to make them go away is to actually have, campaigns and things like that that modifies their behavior so that they are becoming more safer. So every day they are not static. Okay, we are not static. Okay, some days we are getting closer to the boundary, some days we are away, and it's through this daily observation, daily awareness of where we are, that we can actually prevent ourselves from being the person who releases the accident. Okay. Now, Rasmussen actually developed this tool. Okay. I just want to spend a bit more minute. It's close to 11:30. Curi masa sikit. I know it's supposed to end right now. So basically, he actually developed this tool along with his colleague, which involves a graphical approach to map the different actors in accident. As you can see, there are different layers seen in the framework just now. Okay, so the different layers of the socio-technical system is represented. So why is this so? Okay, because this tool wants to highlight the distributed cognition, the distributed location of the decision makers. So the people who decide on things that contribute towards the accident, they're not basically just at the company. Sometimes they're affected by, regulations, procedures, and so on. Okay, and so this is why you have the tool that allows you to map all the different actors, okay, and show how, even though a person is very far away, whatever they decide can affect what occurs elsewhere. All right, and the problem is that when they make the decision, right, their mental model of what goes on is only limited to their vicinity. It's like, please forgive me if anyone is from finance. Sometimes, okay, people from finance, when they allocate funding based on advice and so on, right, their main focus is to balance the budget, okay, all right, without realizing, or maybe they realize, or I don't know, okay, I'm sorry if there's anyone here from finance, right? Without being aware that their decision has significant impact on the people who will receive those funds later. So think about like maintenance, think about, I don't know, if we work in the university, money to run machines and so on, okay? So you have a situation where the people who decide on things that can affect workers are not necessarily at the workers' place. They are elsewhere. They may not even know the workers or involved in the same company as the workers, okay? But they do affect the workers' performance, all right? So this is where you have a tool that allows you to chart, okay? Who are the people involved and how are they affecting what actually goes on at the sharp end of the system, okay? And this is very important because if we are more aware about how the social technical system function, we can start to educate everyone within the system. This is how you're affecting other people. Therefore, in the future, when they decide on things, they are more aware and understanding of the significance of their decision. Meaning their decision is not only to achieve their individual objective, but also to take into consideration other people's objective and other people's welfare performance as well. What happens now is that a lot of organizations, we operate in silos. What we do as people in finance is our business. What you do in your department is your business. I wouldn't care less. But when everyone understands that we are all linked to one another, then there is actually consideration given to other people during the decision-making process. And I think saying this, right, I realize that there's a lot of problems that we face, maybe in our country, not just in safety, right? Some of them have to do with people making decisions without understanding the implications of their decisions to other people, especially when those other people are people that they do not meet at all. All right? So think about administrators, okay? I'm just going to be as vague as possible. Sometimes they make decisions that affect the people, the B40, for example, in a very indirect way. There's a non-linear relationship between their decision and the consequence at the other end of the system. Okay. Now, this is something, if you talk about safety science, we call an emerging thing. Okay. It's not linear. It's not direct. Okay. But there is an impact. Okay. So it's important to have tools such as XMAP, or if you're not in favor of this tool, there's other tools like STPA, which we have done before here. FRAM, so we have done, okay, that works in a slightly different way, but they all point to how we have to look at events, adverse events, accidents, as a function of the whole system rather than just one person or a group of people, okay? So we have to understand how the system behaves rather than just one or two people. And this is very important if you're talking about high-risk industries, large organizations, okay? So with XMAP, okay, these are just, examples of how they can be utilized. You can start to identify who are involved in the whole social technical system. And because they actually divide into different layers, you can see where they are, where is their position within the social technical system. And you start to appreciate how people at the higher levels have a indirect but important impact on other people. Okay, so these are, just to show how, these are the factors, how they're linked together, and these are how to look at what can be done, right? So XMAP is quite versatile. There is no one single way of using it. Rasmussen actually provided like a general idea of the tool where other researchers then modify it according to what they felt was best. So this is just one of the many versions of XMAP that has been published in the literature. Okay, so lastly, okay, again, I'm sorry for taking too much of your time. high reliability organizations. Okay, now I've talked about errors, okay, and why errors occur according to theory of migration by Rasmussen. Okay, what are the small changes that people make every day, you know, that sometimes can trigger accidents. Okay, now there are organizations that somehow they've managed to successfully prevent accidents from occurring. Okay, so these are what we call high reliability organizations. So I think some of you may have heard of them before. Okay, HROs. Now, one classical example is the nuclear powered or even the conventional powered aircraft carrier. All right. If you look at these organizations, including nuclear power generation and I think to a certain extent aviation, they seem to experience their less than their fair share of accidents or harm. What does it mean? It means that, let's say you're supposed to experience like 10% across different industries. That's the rate of incidents, mishap, and so on. But somehow you have these organizations where everyone else is experiencing at 10%, they may be experiencing just 1%. Now, what's ironic or funny is that when you take a look closer at these organizations, they are actually in a more hazardous, more complex environment compared to those experiencing a far higher number than mishaps. Okay, so what's going on here? All right. So this is where the term high reliability organizations come. Okay, you have an organization that somehow they're able to function in a very safe manner despite the hazardous environment they're in. And among the things is that a lot of these organizations operate in high risk. Okay, where something goes wrong, it can relate to catastrophes. Highly complex environment, under high pressure, and very demanding tasks involved. So with the aircraft carrier, so if you're a pilot, you know that landing a plane is one of the significantly higher risk compared to the other phases of the flight. Okay, and in the air, it's not as bad. It's when you land, right? Now, landing on a aircraft carrier, so imagine KIA, right? Now, instead of a very long runway, you miniaturize it. Not only that, right? Instead of on the ground, it's on a boat. So the runway is on a boat in the sea, meaning that because of the movement of the sea, the runway is not fixed, right? It's actually swaying left and right. Okay. Now, adding to that, there will be a lot of people on the runway. You have other planes parked on the runway. You have bombs. You have oil spills. You have people crossing here and there. You have communication going on. And don't forget, you're a jet fighter. You're carrying bombs, and you might be in the middle of a military operation. So you're worried about somebody shooting you down. All these things going on at the same time. Now, what makes even worse is that when you want to land, you can't land like when a plane lands in KLIA. All right. When you want to land on an aircraft carrier, you have a hook that has to catch a cable that is laid across the runway. All right. So when you land, that hook must clip on the cable, and that thing will pull and slow the plane down. Now, not only that, right? You have to do it at the best speed. If it's too fast, then what will happen is that the hook will actually the cable will pull apart the plane. But if it's too slow, the danger is that if you miss the cable, you're going to fall into the sea because you don't have enough power or thrust to actually fly back again for a second attempt. All right. Now, all these things happens on a daily basis on an aircraft carrier, but they don't experience that many accidents. Why? So the thing is, what they find is that a lot of these organizations have these 5 characteristics. Okay. Number one, they're very sensitive to operation. It means that if there's any changes in the system, they are aware. Okay, so what we have talked about just now is how in a social technical system, every day there are changes, adjustments, modifications, okay, carried out by people in order to adapt to the environment. So in high reliability organizations, they are sensitive to what actually goes on. There's reluctance to simplify. They don't try to simplify the process. They understand the process. They try to understand it as it is. Okay, they don't oversimplify, because when you oversimplify, you start to miss things. Okay, there is preoccupation with failure. Everyday failure, accidents, errors is in their mind. Now, when you're constantly vigilant, that's when your chances of preventing them or not committing them is higher. So I think James Gleason actually gave this example. So you have a chicken, right? So you put some chicken feed on the ground and you see the chicken eating the chicken feed. Now, next you have a wild bird. You put some bird seed on the ground and you see the wild bird feeding on it. Now, if a fox came along, who do you think will escape? The chicken or the bird? Okay, theoretically, it will be the bird. Why? If you observe how they eat, right? The chicken will just continue to eat, minding their own business, okay, until it's finished. While the wild bird, you'll peck maybe a few times, and then it will raise its head, take a look around, make sure there's no predator, continue. Every few seconds, it's going to just double check, being vigilant of whatever threat there is. So in a similar way, right? People in HROs, they're like that. They are very preoccupied. Okay, is there going to be a failure? Is there going to be an accident, and so on? Now this can be tiresome, and there are ways to address that. Okay, but that's one of their characteristics. Next, they have difference to expertise. It means that there's no rigid structure where the decision makers must always be the superior. If the expert is at the lower level or hierarchy, the people at the top will actually pass the decision-making position, or the decision makers will be the people at the lower level position, because that person is the expert. So just because you have the captain of the ship, okay, he or she will not be deciding on everything. He or she will also listen to people at the lower level, okay, who knows something better than the captain. Right? So this allows decisions to be based on expert opinion. And lastly, there is practice of resilience. It means how to respond to unexpected events, external stresses. Okay, so this is practice from time to time. Okay, and makes them better prepared. Okay, so I think that's all for this presentation. I've taken a bit more than I expected. So I would like to again thank you everyone for being here, listening to my celote. Okay, if you want to contact me, you can always send me an email. Okay, at my university account. Okay, and I look forward to meeting you all again in the future. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, assalamualaikum and good day.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim, for a very informative session. I'm really interested, especially towards the end of your lecture, when you're talking about the high reliability organization, which you look back into the main concept that error, has to be managed by a system, and it shouldn't be looked into only at individual level. So I think we can spend few minutes, maybe a couple of minutes to answer Q&A. I think we start with one question in the chat room, okay, by Mr. Harun Sani, or Dr. Harun Sani. In hospital environment, how you ensure the doctor is not wrongly diagnosed? How you ensure the doctor is competent enough to use new technology and methodology with limited experience? So maybe we'll start with that question first, Dr. Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim, you have to unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry. Cakap pasal error, and there's an error already occurring. And the error committed by the speaker, memang teruk betul. But that's being human. Okay, so the point is to always respond to errors as best as and as safe as possible. Okay, so thank you very much to the person asking the question. I think Dr. Harun. So the question, if I recall, how do we ensure that there is no misdiagnosis in hospitals? Very interesting question. Okay. I think if we want to understand how to resolve the issue of misdiagnosis, we have to understand why misdiagnosis occur in the first place. Now, in order to understand why misdiagnosis occurs, we have to understand the situation. Is the misdiagnosis occurring because you have a junior healthcare worker, junior doctor, who may still be in the phase of gaining experience, and while doing so, it's not being supervised? That's one issue. Or is there an issue of misdiagnosis because of communication problems, either between the doctor and the patient, or the doctor receiving information from other healthcare workers. The thing with healthcare system is that as patients, we don't see the complexity of what goes on behind behind the scenes. We only see the people who meet us. So let's say you're an inpatient, right? You only see the nurse who come to see you, okay? You see the doctor coming, maybe in the morning once and then in the evening, okay? But we don't see what actually goes on behind the scenes of all the process. The truth is that it's actually a complex process. Healthcare is complex, right? So if there's a misdiagnosis, and if we want to prevent misdiagnosis, I don't think there's like one single silver bullet that solves the problem. We have to actually look at the context of the misdiagnosis, meaning that there's no one answer for every misdiagnosis. You must look at every single case, investigate it as best as possible, and then try to address it. Now, with a human factors perspective, definitely number one, we don't immediately look at the doctor, okay? We look at the system. Is there any issue within the system that provokes the doctor to actually commit misdiagnosis? Okay, so some of the things that they have learned in healthcare, right? I think KKM have tried in the past. I'm not sure whether they're still practicing right now. They've actually tried to teach how to do root cause analysis in hospitals. Now, for those of you in the industry, when you hear root cause analysis, maybe some of you will be saying, "Alah, kacang je." That's like, come on, root cause analysis. But in healthcare, it's difficult. It's difficult for many reasons because, number one, time. You want the clinicians to be involved as well, and you're taking them away from seeing patients. And we know that the time spent with patients is very critical. So it's complicated, right? But I do hope that, you know, they keep on trying, okay? Yes. Just keep on striving to make our healthcare system safer. So I'm sorry if I'm not answering the question as expected, Dr. Harun, but that would be my answer. Now, with regards to new technologies, okay, what I can envision or imagine in my mind right now is that if you receive new equipment, the standard procedure would be you will be at least given a briefing or training on how to use the new equipment. Rarely are you suddenly presented with equipment that you have not seen before, and therefore you're operating at the knowledge-based level, meaning that what is this? What button should I press? That I think rarely happens. If it does, there is a very great cause of concern. If I was the healthcare worker, I would just stop right there and say, I can't operate this safely, therefore I need to use another path. But that requires a level and awareness, okay, of your own expertise level and so on. Okay, so that would be my response.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. So let's have maybe one more question, last question. Okay, so there's a question here by Muhammad Niza Mahazi. The doctor, how fatigue affect human error in general? How fatigue affects human error in general?
Okay, fatigue management is an issue. Okay, I think there's a HFEM event coming up, right? I think organized by IIUM, is, if I'm not wrong. I received the email. So that has to do with driving performance, I think. So I recommend everyone to, you know, participate. Okay. Now back to the question, right? With fatigue, right? What we can generally say is that fatigue affects our ability to actually think at a how you say, our typical level of performance. Okay. Fatigue affects attention. Okay. When we're tired. Okay. I think there's a study that tried to show how when we do not have enough sleep, okay, which leads to fatigue, right? Our level of performance may be similar to someone under the influence of alcohol. Okay, but I can't remember at what level. Okay, but that's just to show that the level of consciousness, okay, our ability to actually think, okay, will be greatly affected by fatigue. Okay, and therefore there are some industries like aviation, they take fatigue management very seriously. For example, when they actually plan their rota or the schedule of their flights, they will take into consideration, okay, the duration of the flight, whether it's international or national, how much rest do you get, right? So this will ensure that there is less likely of error induced by fatigue occurring during the flight. Okay, so good question. Okay, but that's my just a general answer. Okay.
All right, thank you so much. I think we are out of time. So just a final reminder to everyone, if you haven't complete the attendance form, so please go into the chat, just scroll up a little bit, so you can complete the attendance form there, and the organizer, HFEM organizer, would use the information to create the certificate that you probably can use, you know, in your place as an evidence of continuous learning or things like that. Okay, with that, I would again thank Dr. Ibrahim for spending his time, sharing his knowledge, and I would like to also thank everyone for being here, for listening, and for asking questions. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in our next event.
Okay, thank you everyone, and hope to again see you again lah, inshallah. And if anyone wants to do any research on human error accidents, feel free to contact me lah. All right, thanks everyone for listening.
Okay, thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.